Welcome to the debut edition of GEEKDOM Movie Talk, the discussion series where I bring on a guest and we discuss all things as far as the movie genre from a geek point of view. We're talking about geeky movies. And if you're a geek and you like movies, then the one thing that's in your peripheral vision coming up very soon is Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice, which is going to continue the DC Cinematic Universe. As I don't believe it's even called that, but it is the DC Cinematic Universe. And on this video, I wanted to discuss the direction they're taking with Dawn of Justice, the scuttlebutt we've heard about Dawn of Justice, and whether or not Batman vs. Superman, the way it's being presented to us in this incarnation, is acceptable. And joining me on this debut edition, please welcome world-renowned critic and blogger from EssentialFilmsPodcast.com and the founding father of Forced Perspective, which is actually on SuperFriendsUniverse.com. And yes, folks, he used to work in a comic book store, so he knows his shit. Please welcome Adolfo.
Thank you very much. How you doing? I'm a movie geek. I'm a hardcore comic geek. I feel like I'm pretty uniquely qualified to discuss this today.
And that's what we're going to discuss. That's why you're here. Now, I wanted to ask you, because you worked in a comic book store and you grew up on comics. You're a little bit older than me, but you have kind of a very similar perspective on comic books as far as the ones that we grew up with. And when you worked in a comic book store, I mean, honestly, all right, did you ever think when you were a kid, because we're going to talk about the good things first, that we would ever see a legitimate Batman versus Superman theatrical motion picture? Because, I mean, we saw the world's finest animated one. Most recently, we actually saw The Dark Knight Returns. But now we're actually getting a live action movie. And if you would have told me as a kid that, of course, we were kids, Christopher Reeve and Michael Keaton, for example, would be doing a movie together, I would have lost my freaking mind. That's not what we're getting here. But did you ever think that it would actually happen? And was it one of the more requested topics in the store?
It wasn't. It was one of those things that it wasn't necessarily a requested topic, but it was one of those things that people always debated, always talked about. You know, when I worked at the comic book store, I worked in the comic book store from 1995 through the year 2000. Now, during that time period, the major comic book films that came out were Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, and they did drop hints that Superman existed in that universe. In Batman Forever, they mentioned Metropolis. In Batman and Robin, they talked about Superman working alone. This is why Superman works alone. And so it kind of teased the comic geeks out there, and then obviously when fans came in and they talked about that, they started thinking about what would happen if that actually were to happen. But remember, this is also at the same time that the very doomed Superman Lives was also trying to get off the ground and never went anywhere. So it was one of those things. This was very early days of the internet where there was speculation about things, but you never really truly knew if that was ever going to be a possibility. And now, 20 years later, here we go.
There's been a division line I've noticed amongst fans because, people like you and I sometimes think part of it is like an age thing. People like you and I have been talking about how, the direction DC's taking with these movies, starting with really Man of Steel, which kicked off this whole universe. Of course, this movie will be a sequel to that in some ways, is that DC kind of try to make Superman like a dark character. Now, a lot of this, I feel, branched off the Nolan Batman trilogy, which everything that I've read has told us is not in any way in the same universe as this. In fact, I wanted to ask you, was it not true that originally, the original plan when Nolan was still involved was that Man of Steel was supposed to be in the same universe, but then once he left the Justice League project, that was it?
Yeah, I believe initially that was part of the plan, but it was, abandoned pretty early. It was never. So the thing is with this, I think the reason that a lot of fans don't are kind of split on this is you kind of have the newer fans and the older fans. You have the newer fans that grew up on or were introduced to the DC comics through the Dark Knight trilogy, which was very dark and gritty. And the Man of Steel movie reflected not just that tone, but also the tone of DC Comics in the modern era, which is called the New 52 era, which actually I think they're dumping now. But the New 52 era kind of rebooted their entire universe and kind of updated all the characters to the modern age. And in the modern age, Superman is not the classic Superman that we kind of know and love. He's not necessarily super dark, but he's not the shining beacon of hope and promise that that maybe you and I grew up on. Whereas the Christopher Reeve Superman was a lot more based on the Kurt Swan '70s era Superman, which was a little on the campy and corny side, and he had very ridiculous powers. But he was about hope and promise and inspiration.
Yeah, and I think he should always kind of be about that. Now, the direction that Zack Snyder's taking it in, and a lot of film guys aren't too big on Zack Snyder. I think that he kind of his movies kind of look like dark paintings. He has a very a style to his own where it's not quite like Tim Burton. But right, it's not that kind of like purplish style. It's more like a dark gray style, like a depressing, gloomy style. And I think that for characters like Batman, like Suicide Squad, the Joker, kind of the Gotham, like those characters, I think it works. But for Superman, like you said, it should be like a shining beacon of light. And this movie seems to put darkness on Superman. It has that same kind of look to it. I don't know about you. I know you talked about it a while back. I don't know what your feelings are now, all right? But right now, like as we're recording this, are you a fan of Man of Steel or not?
I'm not. When I originally saw it, I think I was kind of caught up. It was a little bit kind of the Phantom Menace syndrome, where I was just happy to see it back on screen again. So I was giving it more of a pass than I should have been. And then whenever I really re-examined the movie, I realized how flawed it truly was. And it is a very flawed film. I mean, you say that the Batman versus Superman looks very dark, but I mean, Man of Steel was I mean they look at the costume, like it's not bright blue and bright red. It's very dark blue and very dark red, almost burgundy. And it just I mean, and the tone of the film just didn't work for me. The fact that Superman kills Zod, spoilers. The fact that he doesn't try to save the city. The fact that Jonathan Kent spends the whole movie trying to hide him and tell him not to be a hero. This is not what Superman is to me.
No, I see what you mean. There was a few things that they creatively that I felt were just eh. Now, this movie, however, I think I'm anticipating it a little bit more. I'm really curious about Jeremy Irons' portrayal of Alfred and of Ben Affleck's portrayal as Batman. I think a lot of fans really have a bad taste in their mouth from Daredevil and just haven't been able to let it go. Ben Affleck, I'm not saying he's freaking Marlon Brando here, but Ben Affleck has a really good catalog of movies, especially recently with Gone Girl and with Argo. And I'm giving him a chance as Batman open-minded. I'm not saying he's going to be able to top on Bale or on Keaton, but I think he might do okay. Now, what are your thoughts on what we've seen? I know that you and I talked about this off air. Like, the first trailer was kind of weird. The second one was a little bit better. Third one was kind of in the middle. So what are your anticipations and expectations for the movie?
I'm very mixed on it. At this point, I got to be honest with you. At this point, I'll be happy if it just doesn't suck. I don't think that it's. I don't think we're going to get something on the level of The Dark Knight or Iron Man 1 or Guardians of the Galaxy or Winter Soldier. Like, those to me are the perfect quintessential comic book films. I don't think we're getting something on that level. So to me, right now, I'm just hoping it's not terrible. The trailers, the trailers have been a very mixed bag. I don't know who's editing them. I don't know who the marketing person behind these trailers is, but they've been very uneven. The first trailer, as you said, was pretty good. The second trailer with Doomsday and Lex Luthor, I thought was horrible, and it really turned me off the movie. The most recent trailer, not bad. Especially, you know what? I will say this: you're talking about Ben Affleck as Batman. I think people have lost their collective minds about that. I never thought he was going to be a bad Batman. I think he's going to be fine. I don't think he's going to be the best, but I think he'll be fine. And that last trailer did have, well, I will say this: the last trailer, the first, like, I don't know, 20, 30 seconds where it's just Batman coming in and taking out those guys in the warehouse, that seemed very much like the Arkham Asylum video games.
Yes.
It looked very cool, and I was like, yeah, that's Batman. That looks really awesome. So I was pretty happy with that. I'm still I'm very cautious about this film. I wouldn't be surprised if it's terrible, but I also wouldn't be surprised if it ends up being not too bad.
What about Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor? Now, if he's playing the kid, all right, but he's playing, from what I understand, he's not playing Junior, he's playing Senior. I haven't read any confirmation otherwise. I don't think he's a very good Lex Luthor Senior. I think he might actually I don't want to say ruin the movie, but based on what we've seen, he's just not a fit for Lex Luthor, in my opinion.
Same here. I don't think, as much as I love the original Richard Donner Supermans, I don't think they've ever actually gotten Lex Luthor right. And don't get me wrong, I love Gene Hackman's portrayal of Lex Luthor in the original Supermans. They're very campy and funny, but that's not really Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor is a cold, calculating businessman supervillain. You know, they got him right on the show Smallville. They got him right on the Justice League cartoon and the Superman cartoons.
Kevin
But
Spacey got him right.
Kevin Spacey got him sort of right. Like he did and he didn't. He did go a little campy sometimes with it. In a movie that isn't as bad as actually people think it is.
Agreed.
But Jesse Eisenberg, I think he's trying to channel Gene Hackman and be really goofy with it. And I don't know if I can sit and watch that for 2 hours.
His hair doesn't do it for me either, but maybe he'll end up bald by the end of the movie.
Yeah, I'm thinking, you know, I got to be honest. I think it's a wig. I think he's probably wearing a wig. Like, well, the character is wearing a wig. I bet you that's not actually his hair.
That would be a great twist. Now, let's talk about the direction DC's taking. Now, DC's always made great animated motion pictures. Always. DC's animated department is incredible. Live action, hit or miss, obviously. The way they're doing this is they're gonna start with Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice. And I guess the idea is to hook people in. Then they're gonna go for Suicide Squad. Then what they're gonna do is, and from what I understand, the TV universe is not the same as the movies. So Arrow and Flash from the TV will not be coming into the movies. That's what I understand as of this recording. Now, we got the Flash, Aquaman, Shazam, Cyborg, another Green Lantern movie, and then Justice League, of course, which is going to be filmed in April, starting shooting in April. What do you think about their strategy? Because Marvel's strategy is, we introduce these heroes in individual movies to build up their character development, and then we put them together in the Avengers, and we have a big epic showdown. Meanwhile, DC is, we're going to introduce them all together, we're going to bring them in and have them meet, and then we're going to do individual origin stories. How do you feel about the strategy that DC's implementing here versus what Marvel's doing?
I personally like Marvel's method better. I get it. They don't want to copy Marvel. Like, I understand why you don't want to copy Marvel. First of all, they're your biggest competitor, and as far as not only in the comic books, but but superhero movies in general as well. I understand you don't want to copy them, but Marvel's formula worked, you know, and it's an interesting strategy. We'll see how it works out for them. You know, I have the schedule up here. You know, it's Batman versus Superman. Then they go to Suicide Squad. Then they do their the Wonder Woman solo movie, and then they do the Justice League. Yeah. And then, like you said, they split up from that, and then do the individual solo movies from there. It's interesting to do it that way. We'll see. We'll see what happens. But it's, to me, I don't know how you can get an audience to care about the Flash or Green Lantern or Aquaman if they don't really have a basis of context. So, I mean, now Aquaman and the Flash are going to have like very small cameos in Batman versus Superman, and so is Cyborg actually.
Yes.
Right now, we don't know what that means as far as how much screen time they get. It could be, you know, one whole scene. It could be a couple minutes, or it could be literally a shot. You know, so we don't know. They're keeping that very under wraps. They're just telling us they're technically in the movie. So, but to me, that's not enough for you to get invested in the character. So the movie The Avengers worked out, and you know, can stop me if I'm going on too long here. But the movie The Avengers worked very well because, you know, you had a whole Captain America movie, you had a whole Thor movie, you had a whole Hulk movie, you had 2 Iron Man movies leading up to it, and then you didn't really have a lot on Black Widow or Hawkeye, but they're the minor characters anyway. But the meat of that group, you know, Hulk, Iron Man, Thor, Captain America, they had their own movies, so that by the time you got to Avengers, you didn't really have to spend a lot of time explaining who they were and why they're there. You can just get right into the action. So if you're in Justice League, now you have to introduce these characters that we haven't seen on screen before, and then also put them part of like a big epic, you know, comic book movie. And I think that is a little dangerous, and I wonder if they're going to be able to pull it off.
Yeah, it is. It's backwards. It's almost like they're going backwards with it. I don't know either, to be honest. It's kind of confusing. I mean, there is some good stuff, like James Wan's doing Aquaman. The Batman movie's up in the air because they keep saying that's going to happen in 2018. They're saying 2021. I don't even know if Affleck's going to care by then. who knows? Now, before we wrap it up here, last question for you about the DC direction. Marvel's going with a real lighthearted approach, and I think we're going to see some darkness coming up with the Thanos Infinity War Part 1. I think that with that movie, we're going to see the Avengers do the job, is how I'm thinking. But like Ant-Man, and actually Civil War is also, I think, going to be like that too. But Ant-Man, Guardians of the Galaxy, kind of lighthearted. Ultron, a little bit darker. Do you think that DC's kind of dark direction, do you think that that is the right way to go? To be different than Marvel, because there's two ways to look at it. One is the DC characters have always been archetypes, and they've always been like symbolism for everything that's good. That's what superheroes in DC are, right? Marvel has always been flawed superheroes that have real problems like alcoholism. Their Spider-Man's broke. What they're doing with the movies is Marvel's really lighthearted. DC's going the dark route. Do you think they should try to copy Marvel or actually try to go the dark route and might maybe appeal to a more mature audience, especially since Deadpool is, the hottest movie we've had in a while, and it's totally for mature audiences?
Well, I certainly don't think we should that everything. I love Deadpool. Let me just say that right off the bat. But my big concern with Deadpool is that a lot of movie studio executives are going to see how well it did and then say, "Oh, it's only because it's an R-rated movie," and then make everything an R-rated movie that doesn't need to be an R-rated movie. That's my concern about that. So I don't think they should go in that direction. I do think they do need to distinguish themselves from Marvel. They can't follow the same kind of formulas. They want to be able to distinguish themselves. But at the same time, I do have a kind of a problem with Superman being in such a dark film. I mean, they've already said that the unrated DVD Blu-ray cut of Superman,
R-rated, right?
of Dawn of Justice is going to be R-rated, which to me is kind of missing the point. But that aside, I think you can take a serious look at a superhero movie and still have fun with it and still look like a comic book. It's just the way that they're shot and the way the filters that they put on them, where everything just looks dark and muddied. They just showed recently on a DC TV special. They had some footage from Wonder Woman, and the footage looked pretty good, except for the fact that it looked like it was shot in that Zack Snyder filter where everything's dark and muted. So. I mean, I don't see why you can't be serious and also have a little bit of color and a little just a tiny little bit of levity. It doesn't have to be like Tony Stark making jokes every 3 seconds, but it doesn't have to be all grim and dour all the time. That's Batman's job. Batman's job is to be grim. Superman doesn't need to be grim. Wonder Woman doesn't need to be grim. The Flash doesn't need to be grim. That's Batman's job. That's why he's the outsider of the group.
Jeez, man, you're on point. On point right there. So, all right, folks, check out the Essential Films Podcast.com so you can check out more of Adolfo's ramblings. And, of course, the Essential Films actually does have a podcast where you go in-depth on classic films, essentially essential films. That's the gimmick there. I'm sure we'll all check out Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice. And hopefully, all I want is a good story. Let's see if they give it to us. Zack Snyder hasn't been batting very well lately. I'm going to give him a chance. We'll see what happens. I kind of wish Affleck was directing, but there you go. So thank you, and I'll catch y'all down the road.